Daniel Taylor wrote a piece, Gary, about Munich and Bobby Charlton that you thought was very good.
Yeah, it's very. I mean, I didn't know an awful lot of what I read about the Munich air disaster in Daniel Taylor's piece. So, Flight 609, that is 60 years ago this weekend.
Every 6, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Only 2 surviving people now who were on that flight alive, part of the Manchester United team.
It's just Bobby Charlton and Harry Gregg.
But it's unbelievable, and we've seen it just 2 years ago with the flight to that South American team. The same thing happened to them. Casts a long shadow over Manchester United, but it's a well-written piece. He talks about the 50th anniversary, which you were saying outside, Philip, was perhaps the first time that Manchester United opened up about the tragedy.
Yes, and recognised it and embraced it and said, we'll do something about it.
And he talks about Bobby Charlton coming into the room where there were more survivors, and they sat down, they chatted about it for the first time as a group, and that Jack Charlton remarks upon it and refers to it as the day that Bobby stopped smiling. So it's a well-written piece by Daniel Taylor, and even for people who are not Manchester United supporters, it really it's quite an emotional piece to read. You can't read it and not be affected by the sadness and the tragedy that still hits home 60 years later.
Yeah, and it was a tragedy. And a couple of years ago, a book came out, and I don't have it with me. I can't remember the name of it, but it was written about the families of those who were left behind after the crash, and a number of them, and this surprised me, Joe, a number of them family were quite bitter towards Manchester United and how they felt they'd been sort of shunned. They had lost loved ones. Some wives had lost husbands, some mothers had lost sons, some sisters had lost brothers. And when it was all, after the initial period of mourning, United sort of moved on, but they kind of forgot about those who were left behind. And like in those days, if you were playing for Man United, you were put up in the house, and if you were married, your wife was with you, and there was children involved in some of the families. And yet after a few weeks later, there was a knock on the door. Sorry, that's our house. And there were people who wanted to speak about it, and they did. And I know some of the names of the families, and Mark Jones was one family, and he died in the crash in '58, and he was married with a child, and others as well, and they spoke about it and said, look, we didn't really want to talk about it, but United didn't do all that much for us. And some people actually were quite vociferous and very bitter, saying it's about time. And this goes back to 50 years, when the 50th anniversary, there were a lot of goodwill towards United. I think they had special matches, they had anniversaries, they had big collections as well, and people were finally kind of looked after. But people were saying, this is too late. This should have been done in 1958, 59, not 2007, 2008. And I think it's something that United now realise they probably should have done more back then. But again, it was a different sort of outlook, different culture. Again, they didn't know how to cope. It was the first time it had happened, although there was a Turin plane crash in the late 40s, which wiped out most of the Torino team. But there were families who felt let down by the club after what happened in '58. Families of the players. Yeah,
Taylor's piece doesn't really touch on that. A lot of it's about Bobby Charlton, actually. Like you mentioned that quote, Gary, a bit from Jack Charlton about him the day he stopped smiling, because Taylor writes that he had been told by a few people that Charlton was always or was often difficult to approach, a bit stern, but apparently before the crash he was really one of the boys, and he says that his life since, he told the group of journalists 10 years ago, had been accompanied by one question: why me? Why he wanted to know was he able to run his hands over his body and realise he had nothing more serious than a bang on the head and a small cut. And one thing I never realised where Charlton had been on the flight really, but he told the journalist he could recall coming to his senses outside the wrecked plane, but still strapped into his seat, and then seeing stricken teammates lying around him, some beyond help. So he gave a talk which lasted an hour to the Manchester United first team 10 years ago. He asked Alex Ferguson, could he do that? Daniel Taylor writes, and this year he's written a letter to all the team which he hopes they read.
Let's not forget that Irish football lost one of the greatest sons of all time in Liam Whelan in that crash. And Liam was very religious. His last words were, if this is it, I'm ready for it, when the plane was making the third attempt to take off. And Harry Gregg heard him say it, and that was verified by the survivors. And Liam was a religious man, only 22 years of age, and Bobby Charlton said he knew he could never be the best player at Manchester United once Liam Whelan was there, or Billy Whelan as they called him.
Right. I hadn't heard that story.
Yeah, he is. When they lost the cup final in '57, they were going for the double. And Liam had scored a load of goals. He was an inside forward. They were beaten by Aston Villa in the final 2-1. But Liam was man of the match, and he got a little Ronson lighter. I remember his brother, Chrissy, told me that. Chrissy's still with us. And but that was a quote from Charlton. They held Liam Whelan, or Billy as they called him, in such high esteem. And he didn't play Munich, but he was part of the panel that travelled. And that was really ironic. He probably didn't. He knew he wasn't going to play, but he went. And it's sad, but Liam Whelan Bridge is still up in Cabra.
Yeah.
And it's sad. 60 years on, it's it still hits a lot of us. I mean, I've read books about it, and I still read about it. I've read the description of the plane and Captain Raymond, and I keep reading it. Why do they go back again and do it a third time? Why not after the second time just would stay here for the night? This, I'm sorry, get a bit emotional about it because but it shouldn't have happened, but it did. And you get people who still talk about it. The Eamon Dumfries of this world. John Giles was there.
Sure.
He was a kid on the old Trafford. He was a schoolboy at the time, and it hit so many people. But and it hit the Whelan family, and we lost a great player in Liam. God rest him.